President Xi Jinping has been meeting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Wuhan in what is being seen as an attempt to ameliorate relations that have been careful yet frigid since the Doklam standoff occurred. What is China seeking from these discussions? Is India changing its policy towards China? And is there room for India in the Belt and Road Initiative to discuss these issues and more? I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Liu Yufan, who is a former Chinese Consul General in Mumbai, and Mr. Wen Ranjiang, a senior fellow with the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia. We shall also be talking to Professor Swaran Singh via satellite from the he's from the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray.
Hitting the chimes to hear the sound of 1,000 years, leaders of China and India appreciate the deep history of their Asian cultures. In the landmark central China city of Wuhan, Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi talked about future development. Xi said ties should be raised to a strategic level, working to build a close partnership. Modi said India is willing to set up communications in the interest of increasing mutual understanding. He wrote about the meeting on Twitter. Relations haven't been easy. Last summer, more than 270 Indian troops crossed the boundary into China's Doklam area in Tibet to obstruct infrastructure building. The dispute was resolved when India withdrew the troops. Modi then paid a visit to China in September for a BRICS summit. The two leaders have shared 8 exchanges since 2014. China is becoming India's largest trading partner. In the first quarter of 2018, bilateral trade volume hit some $22 billion, up over 15% compared with the same period last year. It reached a record high of nearly $85 billion in 2017, growing by more than 20% year-on-year, the largest in the past 5 years. Chinese investment in India added up to more than $8 billion by the end of 2017, with India being an important destination for infrastructure investment. Indian investment in China, meanwhile, grew by over 18% during the past 3 years. Experts say the two countries are building a complementary relationship both politically and economically. More evidence of that is likely to be on display when the two leaders meet again at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in June.
Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
Apparently, we're going to have a dramatic breakthrough through not only this summit meeting in Wuhan, which is an informal one, but also a most likely one on the sidelines of the upcoming SCO in Qingdao, Shandong province. So what do you think will happen?
Well, I think, to my understanding, Prime Minister Modi is visiting Wuhan basically to set the bilateral relations in a good tune. And secondly, he's going to have one-to-one discussions and dialogues to try to converge the common interests, the common ground, and the common agendas which is going to be put forward jointly, hopefully, at the Qingdao Summit for Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These are the two areas. But thirdly, maybe the two leaders are going to have exchange of views in terms of anti-globalization behaviors by some countries, at the new Cold War which is evolving in the Middle East and things like that. So these are the 3 areas whereby the two leaders are going to, to meet and talk, to make decisions.
Spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Professor Wen Ranjiang, said to the world media, look, we're going to expect to have something very big on the horizon.
Yeah.
Very ambitious blueprint and vision shared by the two leaders, Mr. Xi Jinping and his Indian counterpart. So what are the big surprises?
Well, here people are surprised by saying, look, barely about 7-8 months ago, the two countries were talking about almost going to a border war. And yet we have two leaders last September 1st getting a little bit past the initial tension and now having a full-blown summit. I think there are strategic considerations. I think some press reports saying the two leaders are going to discuss about the 100-year a time, some kind of a bigger strategic context? I'm not sure, because everything is changing, everything is local, and all the politics is local. Mr. Xi Jinping just consolidated his 5-year tenure with a successful party congress and People's Congress. Mr. Modi congratulated him very warmly, and he himself then facing an election next year in India. Then international context, we have US, Japan, Australia, and India getting some kind of a quad situation to talk about this Indo-Pacific strategy. So these are, just to complement what Mr. Liu mentioned, I think these are the issues on the table, and we also know, it's no secret that India is not comfortable, openly actually opposed the One Belt, One Road, the Belt and Road Initiative that Mr. Xi Jinping is advocating. Do they come together to resolve these bigger global 100-year kind of once-a-time discussions, or some of the very immediate political considerations are at play? I think both are at play.
Trade protectionism is something politicians turn to in times of crisis, and now India is no exception when it comes to the bilateral relationship between Washington and New Delhi. It seems New Delhi is not only very upset about the Belt and Road Initiative due to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, they are also unhappy about the demand from Washington to have a bigger market shares. And therefore, what President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi discuss in Wuhan or Qingdao is not as important as the message that New Delhi delivers to Washington. Look, we are a major power that should be taken more seriously than you do, and therefore we are a very important balancing power between China and Washington. This is exactly the message that Prime Minister Modi wants to deliver. What do you think of the implications here?
The implications, as I look at it, would be can be analyzed in these contexts. Both India and China are the game rules receiver within the current global trade and investment game rules. When China and the US are apparently locked into a cold trade war, India, as a developing nation or developing economy, is feeling the pinch, because India is going to face the same scenarios once the US-China trade war gets really started. So this is a thing that has prompted the two leaders to sit down together and try to find out the ways how to defend, how to protect the legal rights and the interests in terms of the trade and the economy. And secondly, with regard to the US decision to bypass the WTO rules to set the bilateral, punitive, measures on trade policy, trade partners, India is also scared that it may become the next, target in the line.
When this president, who is known for his unpredictability, says America first, then everybody, including allies and partners of Washington, would feel scared. India is no exception, by the way, in this broad context. What do you think of the common concerns shared by all politicians?
Well, the India situation is interesting. Its economy is picking up speed. It's actually at a higher percentage growth rate projected this year over China. Even the vast volume added to the annual economy is far less than what China is adding. And so I think India is in favor of keeping the current international economic order. That actually benefited China's rise, and India is following behind very closely. We can see the sequence after China is going into a stabilized development period, a bit slowed down, but India is picking up speed. At this moment, I think the disruptive of a US-led America first is not going to do well for India. So these are the considerations the two leaders may convey to each other than the strategic potential rivalry they're talking about structurally between China and India. If you look at the historical context, China used to be where India was before, and China wanted to have a say in the international system. I think we need to understand India in its own position is feeling all the insecurities regarding how to deliver its own growth with a so-called favorable international environment that China used to talk so much about, and China is trying to defend. I think in that sense, the two countries have something in common other than the competition that's actually also going on at the same time. It's a very complex relationship, and they need to handle that with wisdom. I think the format of the summit looks good, with 2 days, 2 leaders talking private.
I think
that's a catchphrase about
yes.
feel good for both sides.
Yes, that's one point I would to compliment my good friend Professor Zhang. As Professor Zhang mentioned, Indian economic growth rate is higher than the Chinese one. But Prime Minister Modi knows for sure that economic speed would not make any sense unless it's put against the economic scale, economic competitiveness, and the economic resources that would support the future development. So these are the real reasons that have driven Prime Minister Modi to come to China to try to seek the possible cooperation. I
really appreciate the road picture you guys depict about the ongoing summit in Wuhan, the capital city of Hubei province in central China. Now, I got a strong feeling that they deny vehemently that India should be taken as an integral part of the Indo-Pacific region, which somehow carries geopolitical rivalry against China. It refuses to be used as a bargaining chip between Washington and its allies in this region. Why do you think Indians carefully keep a distance from the geopolitical blueprint of the policy planners in the DC?
I had the opportunity to work in India for 2 years, and I watched very closely. This is one of the things that I've been thinking a lot lately. India, as the first colonial power to receive, one of the first colonial powers to receive independence from UK, and ever since India has regarded itself as a regional power to become a global power. As such, India has never forget its dream to become a global power. According to various Indian leaders, India's largest dream is to be a leading power in global politics. In this regard, India has never been standing very close with any other powers in the world.
Is that also because of the history of non-aligned movement? Is one of the founding
It was one of the contributing
of
reasons, but I think non-aligned movement is already a movement in theory and in memory. Because the movement itself has changed because of the globalization, because of the financial crisis and the economic development that all the member countries are looking after. So this is only one contributing factor that leads to the current national strategies of India. The other more important reason is India has realized the one sure way to be a global leader is for the sustainable economic growth, which is the biggest challenges that India is faced with.
Well, we have a Chinese saying, 不打不相识, okay? Without the Doklam crisis that almost led to a head-on confrontation militarily, neither would be clearly aware, look, this will wreak havoc with not only the two economies, but perhaps the rest of the world. Now, the Indians have also been obsessively concerned with the so-called Pearl conspiracy, namely our business presence in not only Gwadar deepwater port of Pakistan, but also Hambantota of Sri Lanka, and our construction of pipelines in Myanmar. Now, these are the neighboring countries of India, and India always regards itself as the hegemonic, quote-unquote, dominant power in South Asia. So, given the bipartisan politics of these democracies in South Asia, do you think the Indian influence should always be highly regarded or respected or held in a high esteem before we turn to business cooperation with Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal, so on and so forth?
This is actually exactly the reality. We're looking at where China is today and where India is. You can talk about the regional dominant powers, China being in East Asia, India being in South Asia, but the two countries are not the same. China is ranking at the world stage with the United States, more or less. Okay, India has, by all the good speed so far, 1/5 of Chinese economic strength. Its military spending probably at 1/3 or less of the Chinese budget. So there's no comparison. China is a global power. And what China is doing, as you described, it goes into the regions India considers a traditional backyard. But India is not quite a global power, in my opinion, in comparison with China and the United States. But it wants to get there. And I think that's what I call the structural tensions. The two countries need to accommodate each other. China is coming, period, to every corner of the world. Even Americans has to think of a way of either accommodating or we're looking at containing China. But that's the reality we're looking at.
There's no doubt that Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping are aware that the Indo-Pacific Ocean is big enough to accommodate the strategic needs of the elephant and the dragon. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Gentlemen, we are very happy to finally resume our contact with Professor Swaran Singh from the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Yes, what do you think will be the media response from the Indian side about the outcome coming out of the summit in Wuhan?
I think the fact that the two leaders have decided to spend 2 full days, 8 to 10 hours each day of meetings, of which 4 of the 6 meetings are one-to-one meetings, and these meetings also include public display of their body language and bonhomie when they are walking or when they are in a boat ride, is really reflection of enormous mutual confidence that the two leaders have developed over a period of time. They have had kind of informal meetings before. When Xi Jinping came to India, there was a similar meeting in Prime Minister Modi's home province in Ahmedabad before the formal summit happened in New Delhi. Similarly, when Prime Minister Modi went to China in 2015, President Xi Jinping then flew to Xi'an, and there was an informal meeting again before they both met in Beijing. And they have, in any case, this is the 11th time they are meeting, and this is the 4th time Prime Minister of India is traveling to China. He has traveled there as a chief minister of a province earlier. So at least at the level of two leaders, there seems to be sufficient confidence to be able to spend that much time together and also do a public display of their, kind of mutual bonhomie or chemistry. That should lead to some long-term major decisions, bold decisions from both sides. They may not be known immediately to us. They will be known maybe over a period of time. But at this time, the only visible part is the body language that I think everybody will notice how confident and how comfortable they feel with each other. In long run, there could be several issues that will be resolved at the level of mutual understanding, which will be implemented in coming years and maybe decades. And issues right on the table, maybe, which could be mentioned, is Belt and Road Initiative, which is most favorite topic for President Xi Jinping. I'm sure he would like to ensure that India comes on board. India will, of course, share its sensitivities and concerns, and they will have to find out how those can be addressed. Issues of their trade maybe crossing $100 billion this year could be something that could be an understanding. China could also maybe suggest a kind of a big-ticket investment into India, but these are all at the level of understanding, and maybe decisions will happen in subsequent months and years to happen. But I think it's a good thing President Xi Jinping has had such informal meetings with American presidents before, with Obama in Sunnylands and with, of course, Donald Trump in Florida. So both sides are beginning to deal with each other as big power relationships. And that's a good signal for India. And I think there will be possibility of some better understanding, which will ensure that the several irritations that keep happening for the last 2 years plus, border incursions, nuclear suppliers group, Azhar Masood issue, all kinds of irritations could gradually at least begin to be managed very well and possibly resolved over a period of time. So overall, I think it's a positive signal that one gets, and I noticed that in Chinese media and among Chinese officials, there is enormous enthusiasm about it, and I think this kind of hosting of Indian Prime Minister is a good sign for bilateral relations of China and India.
This time around, it seems a trade war will break out, or someone said it's well underway, and we need to have diplomatic security or stabilization on our periphery, such as in North Korea, the denuclearization process. The good news is that Moon Jae-in and the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un is having the summit meeting, and also we're going to have a breakthrough in the bilateral relationship between India and China. So in South Asia and Northeast Asia, we're going to have stability for the moment, and therefore we can talk to the United States in this trade standoff. We're going to have a sharp focus on the U.S. and the U.S. only.
Well, I think with the latest development of regional relations between China and the countries in the Northeast and South Asia subcontinent, these two things are not pre-planned. They are just the natural outcome.
But it seems the proactive diplomacy on the Chinese side is gaining momentum.
Oh, yes.
Obviously,
in this regard, I totally
China
agree with
refuses
you.
to be isolated by the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy.
Definitely, these latest developments along the periphery areas of China would create a more solid ground for China to bargain with the United States. As I look at it, the real sense of trade war will not and should never happen, because Chinese economy and the U.S. economies have come together in such an intensity. Neither side could afford to launch the war on the other side without being seriously hurt, on its own feet, so to speak. So in this regard, I think the security situation and the improvement in this regard definitely will help. But the eventual outcome of the China-U.S. trade, arm twisting I would call it, would end upon two things. First is the economic chips that each side would have. And second is the capability, to bargain at the negotiation table, which will happen soon in Beijing.
Wen, Pakistan has always been a heavyweight player in regional politics of South Asia. It is our all-weather friend, no doubt to say that. The major obstacle that gets in the way between India and China at this moment is the Belt and Road Initiative, which was rejected, the summit of which was rejected by New Delhi last year. It refused to attend this Belt and Road Initiative and the summit. Therefore, to have this process of rapprochement underway, we need to address the issues very seriously of terrorism and whether we still label the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. That's the major concern of our Indian friends. Now, do you think China is likely to make any concessions at the cost of our all-weather friendship with Islamabad?
Well, this is such a good, important piece of the China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think China wants to push this through. But I think the Chinese side is more and more in a position of understanding the Indian concerns. Traditionally, they have issues with Pakistan, multi-front, rather than not only terrorist issues, but it's a traditional rivalry, cultural, historical, many things. China needs to be very sensitive. China should not choose sides between India and Pakistan, and China tends to say creating win-win or win-win-win situations. This is where I think China need to look at the situation, saying is, how do you make the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor that is not a threat or perceived to be not a threat by India, which China probably can play a more constructive role in saying, this is just not something about China and Pakistan. It's about China, India, and Pakistan together. Can we deal with each other in a way that maybe paving the way for Pakistan and India to solve some of the traditional rivalry issues through the economic initiatives? Everybody benefits. I think that's the initial thinking behind the Belt and Road Initiative. And this could be a test case, in my opinion, if how China can handle this better. And might be something already being discussed between Mr. Xi and Mr. Modi in the past couple of days.
Yes, definitely it's going to be part of the dialogues.
And perhaps the enlargement of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that recruits India and Pakistan would be an opportunity
definitely
for this region to be more inclusive in an attempt to pursue co-prosperity. Let me get back to Professor Swaran Singh. How do you foresee the possibility that a joint communique will be released by the two leaders in Wuhan?
It will be ambitious to expect a joint communique to be issued at the end of this meeting. Both sides have underlined it repeatedly that no specific issues are on the table for discussion and no outcomes in terms of concrete documents should be expected. But they might surprise us all by coming out with some kind of a joint communique or declaration, which will be a very short one at a very broad level of kind of supporting each other. That sentiment has been showcased several times by leaders from both sides. Even in middle of Doklam crisis, they had 3 summit meetings in Kazakhstan, then of course in Hamburg, and then in Xiamen. The body language was positive, words were positive, but to add meanings to those words, to add thrust to those words is what is being attempted here. And I think that is more important, and they have to really underline the fact that relationship is increasingly complementary. India, with the rising economy, needs enormous investments in infrastructure, and China has excess of experience, finance, technology to do that investment. So it's a complementary give and take relationship, and that should be underlined. And that should open several avenues of how, first of all, to begin with, economic partnership and relationship could be strengthened. And that will have positive influence on other sectors of relationship that they have had. They have managed relationships very well, but repeated irritations coming up in their interactions is something that they need to manage better. And that understanding and trust, I think, will be the focus as they walk together and talk together and display that, body language and confidence to the media, which will be covering every part of their visit.
Thank you so much, Professor Singh.
Much of it is public.
Observers, Indian and Chinese alike, are watching out with a sense of big relief that the ability to manage disputes and crises is growing in this process of confidence building and trust building. I thank you so much for being with us. And that's it for this edition of Dialogue on the summit meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in Wuhan. And soon after that, we're going to have the SCO summit in Qingdao, capital city of Shandong province in eastern China. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.